So ladies and gentlemen, right now I'd like to introduce to you Mark Baird.
I apologize for the notes. I write them, I hardly ever use them, but I'm going to try to use them this time because there are a lot of important things to say, so I have to wear my glasses to read the notes. First of all, I just want to say something. I am not armed because I'm free. I am not. I am free because I'm armed. And Richard Henry Lee said in 1789 that to preserve liberty, the whole body of the people should always possess arms and be taught at a very young age how to use them. Now, the Bill of Rights was the codification of the inalienable rights that were given you by God, placed in your heart at the moment of your creation. And the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, when the Constitution was written, they had to decide whether to put this Charter of Rights in the Constitution. And this comes a lot from the 1689 English Charter of Rights. A lot of this comes from that. But most of it is thousands of years old. And we know that there's nothing new under the sun, right? The things that this government in California is trying to do have been tried again and again and again and again. And in fact, Adolf Hitler tried it in 1936. He said, why would we allow subject people to be armed? How can we conquer them if they have guns? Joe Stalin said, ideas are as dangerous as guns. We don't let people have guns, why would we let them have ideas? How are we doing in California? You have the inalienable right to defend self and family. See, the Second Amendment has always been considered a dual right. And that is first defense of self. And that was codified much earlier than 1789. It starts with Marcus Cicero. And he said that some laws are not written on paper anywhere. They're not laid down. They are derived from nature itself, among those being the right of a man to defend self without giving back to the wall. Do you know what that means? Without giving way. In other words, if you're presented with evil, why should you have to run? Why should a free people be required to retreat in the face of insufferable evil? And the answer is that's a rule that government instituted, not a natural law. William Blackstone called these the absolute rights. Those are the rights you have because you were born a free individual. God being the ultimate expression of freedom, the only free being in the entire universe, entirely free, perfectly free. And you were created in His image with those freedoms. And so with those freedoms, of course, comes responsibility, and we'll get to that in a minute, but you're perfectly free. And so with that freedom come the inalienable rights, the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or what John Locke said, life, liberty, and property. And then Samuel Adams added, together with the right to defend those as best we can. Because Blackstone said you have the absolute right to life, whether you participate in society or not. If you live in a hole in the ground, you have certain rights because you're alive and you're a free-thinking individual. You have the right to your life. Well, what good is your life if any bear, animal, stranger, or evil person can come and take it anytime they want, because you lack the means to defend yourself. Even a bear has a mechanism for defense, his teeth and his claws. You don't have those things. And if you're a 100-pound woman, you certainly don't have the ability to subdue a 6'5", 250-pound attacker, do you? So you have to have tools to defend your life. And you have to have tools to defend your property. And Blackstone said you have the right to defend property. Because what good would it do you in your hole in the ground, and you've gathered enough rocks to make fire and pound out some hides and make your clothes, if somebody came and stole the rocks every day, and you had no means to defend those rocks? Why bother gathering them? Why not just jump off the cliff? And you have the right to do those things because you are alive, and it is natural for anyone to defend their life and their property. And then we form associations, and Blackstone called that civil liberty. Our associations are society, and we participate in those voluntarily. In that association, we give government certain rights in order to protect the rights that we hold most dear, the inalienable rights. Because freedom is a funny thing, it can be messy. You don't have the freedom to go 100 miles an hour down the road because you may kill someone else that's using the freedom to only go 55. So you surrender some freedoms in order to gain liberty and protect that liberty. So what is liberty? It's freedom with responsibility. And I don't want to disparage any of the groups here. And if I say something, I don't mean that to disparage any of their efforts, because as Sam says, if you can only join one, join the NRA. If you can join them all, join them all. But I don't agree with everything the NRA says. And we'll get to that in a little bit, and we'll probably talk about that afterwards. And we need to educate the groups so that they can protect our liberties in the way that our money wants them to. All right, so how many of you trust a government that doesn't trust you? If the government doesn't trust you with weapons, why on earth would you trust a government that has the weapons that you're barred from having? In the Miller case in 1936 or 38, the government specifically said that the Second Amendment protects weapons that are military grade. Well, in the state of California, if a weapon looks like it could have been military because it has evil features, you know, black plastic, I guess if it's white plastic, it's not as evil, but if it's black plastic, you're in trouble. So why would you trust a government? How many of you trust a government that exempts itself from the laws that they impose upon you? The California legislature exempted itself from the show cause for CCW in 2011 or 2012. Members of the California legislature, when they apply for a CCW, do not have to show good cause, as many, fortunately not in this county or Siskiyou County, in my county. In my county, the sheriff will issue if you pass a background check. But it's still permission. And it bothers me to have to ask permission of the government to exercise a right that God gave me. That's not good. I like my sheriff, I work with him, but I don't like the idea that I have to ask government's permission to defend my life, my family, or my community. How many of you trust a government that says that things that you've owned for perhaps decades and used safely and lawfully are now illegal? Do you know what ex post facto means? Do you know what a bill of attainder is? That is a legislative act that targets a group of people because of what they're doing. If you exercise your Second Amendment right by owning an AR-15 or any semi-automatic centerfire rifle that has any evil features or is not on the California approved pistol roster, you are a group of people that defends the Second Amendment. You're being targeted by the legislature because they hate liberty, they hate the Second Amendment, and by the way, they hate you. And unfortunately, because your vote is irrelevant, you don't have enough representation to defend yourself legislatively, we're here talking about other ways that we can do it. The NRA argued in June of 2016 that states can ban open carry. They argued in front of the Ninth Circuit that states should be able to choose whether they honor open carry or concealed carry. And that was in the San Diego v. Peretta. And so, what are we asking ourselves? Does the Second Amendment, which guarantees you the right to keep and bear arms, and those rights shall not be infringed, does that come with a price tag? In other words, are we now in a position where our defender says that we have to ask the government's okay to do that? I say to you, no. Now, once again, I'm a member of the NRA. I support the NRA. But we need to educate some of our groups as to how we want this to occur, because I don't want limits on my liberty. I don't have limits on my liberty. I have a water rights group in Siskiyou County that I helped form, and we have a motto: we will not submit. I am armed every day. I will never be disarmed as long as I'm breathing. I don't care what the government says, and I don't care what they do, because that is an inalienable right, and I don't ask anyone's permission to exercise it. How many of you know that the government uses something called the balanced interest to strip you of your liberty? In other words, what the government has to claim in court, according to the Ninth Circuit in the state of California, I'm sorry, did I say circus? I meant circuit. According to the Ninth Circuit in the state of California, the government has a balanced interest when it comes to your liberty. Now, that's in direct violation of Supreme Court ruling or Supreme Court opinion in Heller versus DC. What the government says is, if we say it's for the public health and safety, then we have to determine whether a right is worth hanging on to. So the government is going to ask another government agency, and by the way, Edmund Koch said that all courts are corrupt because the judge knows who signs his paycheck, another government agency. And so here the government is asking the court, because we claim there's a public health and safety risk, we want you to determine whether the Second Amendment is a right that is worth hanging on to. Every time I say that, I cringe. There is no balanced interest when it comes to God-given rights unless something is happening here. And how many of you think that the government is trying to assume the role that God already has? If the government can say to you, that right is not worth having, and that is a right that was given you by your Creator, well, I just don't know. Who am I going to follow? Let me see. Kevin De Leon or God? That's a tough one. Give me a minute. So what is the legitimate role of government? In fact, what's the only role of government? To secure the rights of the people, to secure the rights of the governed. Where do they get their power? By consent of the governed. California Constitution, Article 2, Section 1 says government was instituted for the good of the people, and I'm paraphrasing. And it is their, and all just power derives from the people. And it is their right and their responsibility to alter or reform that government whenever the public good demands it. Is the Constitution our founding document, or isn't it? Actually, it's not. It's our second try. The preamble of the Constitution says, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. We had a union before. We had the Articles of Confederation, and they didn't work. So in Constitutional Convention, representatives of the states, the authors of the contract, met and came up with a new form of government. In other words, the people altered or abolished the Articles of Confederation in favor of a government more suitable to their happiness and to their needs. That's the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists, led by Richard Lee and some other notables, Sam Adams and other people, said we need a Charter of Rights. The rest of the guys, the mainliners, said no, we don't, because if we outline a Charter of Rights, that will give government room to interrupt those rights. But the Anti-Federalists held on, and they managed to prevail. The Bill of Rights is not necessarily something that was included right from the beginning. It was a compromise to get the Anti-Federalists to shut up and vote for the Constitution. But it works because it outlined the rights that no one has the ability to take from you. No one has the ability to abridge. No one has the ability to interfere in. But here's the deal, folks. You don't get the government you deserve. You get the government you allow. And we have done this to ourselves. I'm not trying to escape responsibility here. I'm a big fan of personal responsibility. And this is our own fault because we didn't stand up right from the beginning and demand something that you know in your heart. The Constitution was not meant to protect you from all evil. The Constitution was meant to protect you from the good intentions of well-meaning tyrants. The Constitution is the line the government is not supposed to cross. The Bill of Rights doesn't bind people, it binds government. If that's true, why do we have over 20,000 gun laws? If that's the case, if people institute government to secure their liberty, why is that true? Because we have failed to pay attention. We have failed to show up when guys like Sam and his colleagues needed us in the state legislature. And when I mean show up, I mean 20, 30, 40, 50, 100,000 of us. So this is our fault. These guys are trying to help us, but they can't help us without us. We need to start showing up, and we need to start ponying up. And we need to let them know what we want and how we want it. That's how we can regain our liberty if we stick with California. There's another thing that Thomas Jefferson said, and then I'm going to go to court cases and tell you what the answer is. Thomas Jefferson said that a government afraid of its people is democracy, people afraid of government is tyranny. And here we are today. And there are a lot of court cases that define some of the things that I've spoken about, and I can prove everything I've said, so ask me questions. But one thing I want to get to last before I give you the answer is, how many people here think the police have a duty to protect you? I don't see very many hands, so most of you have probably heard this. They don't. In fact, there are Supreme Court cases to say that the government and law enforcement has no duty whatsoever to protect you from crime or violence or anything else for that matter. California Government Code, Section 821, Section 845, and 846 says that public employees will suffer no liability for failing to arrest a person or hold on to a person that they have arrested. That cities and municipalities are not required to even form police departments. That no public employee will suffer liability for failing to protect you, or for failing to act on an enactment or failing to act on an enactment. That's California Government Code, and there are many, many codes in many states that are much like that. And the case of Warren versus DC was the first case that showed that to be true. There were 3 women who lived in a condominium. A couple of guys kicked in the door. They did some horrible things to one of the girls while the other 2 were calling the police over a period of hours and hours and hours. Finally, the noise died down. The other 2 girls went downstairs. The attackers were still there. They took them to another apartment and spent the next 14 hours doing horrible things. Police had been called repeatedly. They'd even come to the house. But they, for some reason, failed to know that there was a crime in progress and failed to protect these 3 women. And the appellate court in DC found that the government has a general duty to protect society, but not an individual duty to protect you unless you have a special relationship. What constitutes a special relationship? You're in jail. If I, as a police officer, deprive you of your liberty, I now have the responsibility to protect you in a limited fashion, because government's duty is not to protect you unless they have deprived you of the means to protect yourselves. And that can happen in many ways, and there are a few court cases that are kind of gray on that, but generally speaking, government has no duty to protect you. Now, the police officer's code of ethics and code of standards, they try to protect you. They do the best they can. They're good men and women, and they're working hard, and they're putting themselves in harm's way for us. But they can't. But they can't be everywhere at once. In fact, in my county, we don't even have law enforcement in the county in large at certain times of the night. We have CHP, but no sheriff's department, because we can't afford it. And in this day and age, there are 500,000 cops in the United States, but there are 360 million people. They can't be everywhere. They can't protect you. It's not their job. Your job is to protect yourself and your family, but you need the means to do it. Now, here's the answer. California is going to strip you of your rights. I don't think there's any doubt about that. They're already well on their way. Pretty soon they'll ban semi-automatic weapons, maybe this year. Then they'll attack semi-automatic pistols, and pretty soon you'll be back to Iraq. The answer is the state of Jefferson. Because instead of chasing down 20,000 causes on 20,000 fronts with $20,000 million if we could get it together, and losing 90% of them because the courts don't respect our opinion and don't care what you think, and neither does the state, why not form a state that has liberty to begin with? How will the Second Amendment be handled in the state of Jefferson? Constitutional carry. That's it. That's easy. Now, here comes the responsibility part. If you make a mistake with your gun, we will lock you up and throw away the key. And it will be a felony, by the way. So in California, not so much anymore. In Jefferson, you will have the gun. You will have the weapon. You will have the right to protect yourself and defend yourself. Just don't mess it up, because there will be consequences for anyone who infringes on someone else's liberty with their weapon. And that's the way it ought to be. I want to thank you all for listening to me, and thank these gentlemen here, and we're open to your questions. Time has come for 51.